Welcome to the Shooting Times podcast, which is brought to you by Fieldsports Press. Today we are focusing on the 4th of October issue. I can't believe that we have arrived at October already. This is the first issue in 7 years that isn't edited by me. I was at it for 7 years. Ollie Harvey, my successor, has been at it for a week. So I've been flicking through what I suppose is his issue. And I'm joined today by Leon Challis-Davies, who I've known now for quite a long time. Leon, how do you are a chef. Everyone just calls you Leon the chef. But the British Game Assurance is your home at the moment. How did you get into this crazy world?
You're right. I've been a chef for, I want to say about 23 years. And
how old are you? I always think you're younger than you actually are. You're sort of.
I'm nearly 40. Let's just put it that way. I'm not quite 40, but I'm not far away from 40. And I'm that in between age. Yeah, I'm a lover of food, all food. Everyone knows that. I absolutely love working with game. Is my top tier. And I'm going to touch on that subject. So game, I'm going to start to referring to as wild meat. So Patrick, if we both can correct each other,
let's talk about that in due course, because I have a slight issue with the wild meat conundrum. Before we get there, let's hit up some of the news pages. There was a very interesting one, Leon, that I think will probably chime with you on myxomatosis. So myxomatosis is an ongoing thing in the UK. I think we've all known rabbit populations that have sort of come and gone because of myxomatosis. But there have been a number of myxomatosis outbreaks across the UK over the past couple of weeks, and there have been reports of up to 100 rabbits just lying there in the field dead, which is pretty interesting. Now, Leon, what I wanted to ask you is how our relationship with rabbit has changed, because it was something that people ate a lot of, and now, I see it actually. I live in a very diverse part of London, and I see it for sale around here, but it's not something that you see for sale in the way you once did. Why is that?
We've all changed perception. And without attacking the supermarkets and the conglomerates, that's what we're used to now. We're used to bland, plain, straightforward food, chickens that have been injected with a water salt solution, beef that's not really beefy, if you understand that sort of comment, and the same for lamb and pork, are very, very plain flavours. That flavouring is gone, and wild meat has got a flavour to it. It's got a taste. It tastes exactly what it is, and I think people are like, "Oh, that's a bit too much for me." So that's why you see rabbit and get wild meat sort of disappearing off the shelves or off the tables as much as you really want to. That's what I would say.
That's really interesting. There was another one moving from rabbit to deer. There's a plan to classify Japanese sika deer as an invasive species across Europe. Now, this is a very interesting one. Have you cooked much with sika before, Leon?
I have. I've been very lucky, and we've got a small. And the figures are even in the article as well. About 11,000 they said head of sika deer in the UK, which is quite a high number.
I think there's going to be 20,000 in Ireland, which is a lot.
That's a lot, right? And we do get a chance to use sika deer, and do you know what? I think it's a beautiful meat to eat, and. Patrick, what do you think? For me, putting it on the invasive species list is a big step for someone maybe who's made that call with not being boots on the ground. Is that?
Well, I just think the really interesting thing is that there's maybe a perception among some that those who hunt don't kind of love wild animals dearly in the same way that sort of other people might, right? The people who sit down and watch Springwatch and so on. But we've got Will Amara quoted here, who's a very good ST contributor, actually. He's a real favourite of mine, who lives in the Wicklow Mountains. And he was saying that, he just thinks with Sika that if we reclassify them effectively as vermin and shoot them year round, we lose respect for them. It's a species that he really loves, and to him, they've been here for 150 years, or I should say, they've been there for 150 years. So to do that to them, as it were, he thinks would be completely wrong. So you've got this interesting thing where conservationists are kind of baying for Sika blood, and people like Will Amara, a
Boots
force,
on the ground guy
yeah,
that's there in bowl.
King is saying, no, we've got to look after these things and we've got to love them.
That right there. It just goes to show what happens in our industry week in and week out with people who work amongst it and people who don't, calling for blood, like you said, who've got no clue about what goes on in our industry.
We'll keep an eye on that one. It's really interesting. I mean, there are similar conversations going on here with deer, actually, with red stags, and the season for those is something we've touched on quite a bit over the past few months. There's a very interesting thing, Leon, that I think will chime with you, which is that various game dealers are struggling to find people to pluck their pheasants this season. So, if anybody's listening and they fancy a little bit of work as a pheasant
plucker, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the guild of pheasant pluckers. Then do get in touch. But I mean, is that actually a problem, Leon? I mean, look, we all know that it's hard to shift game if you're a shoot. Is part of the issue that game dealers can't find people to actually do the work?
From my understanding and working with game dealers really closely the last sort of 4 or 5 years, is that and I have to talk about chicken for a second, because the way that we process chicken is that they go through the system and the belts and everything else. They're hung upside down and dipped and they're plucked very, very quickly and easily. And the problem that we have is that birds are stored in fridges. They can come into dealers stiff with rigor mortis, and that makes it even harder. And then it's the process that you do it. So you've got machines that you can put a bird in, and it sort of takes the feathers off it by knocking it around with a bit of rubber ends on, which I think is very kind of like a household type plucking machine. But you're sort of commercial feather suckers and wax dip. I'm guessing, and it's a costly process for game dealers to process cold birds. So I think that's more their problem is the cost of it. So we all know that we can get free birds up and down the country. It's quite a contentious thing, actually. We all know we can get free birds up and down the country when we're out shooting ourselves, and people give them away on various websites, which I've seen on social media. And then people sort of begrudging wanting to pay. But the reality is that there are people who aren't in our industry that want to get their hands on wild meat, and you have to pluck them in the right fashion so that they're not put off.
Yeah, let's get back to that point. Actually, there was just one story that I wanted to touch on just before we went back to game, which is that Parazzi Shotguns has found a new distributor. Now, those of you who read ST regularly will have seen, the likes of Tom Payne shooting with a Parazzi. I don't know if you're a gun nerd, Leon. I'm not really, but I have to say I have shot with Tom's Parazzi, and it is a really nice. They're expensive, but they're sort of.
I'm very lucky enough to shot with Tom and shot his Parazzis.
They're almost like expensive workhorses, I almost think. So they, there's no, they don't look fancy, but they feel just really spot on. And they now have a new distributor in the UK. So I think I've always looked at Parazzi and thought, what, that should be like one of the most popular guns going. But it's kind of remained a bit of a connoisseur's choice, and perhaps something shot by kind of very keen clay shots and a few game shots. So I think it's just going to be really interesting. The new distributor is headed up by Mark Swift, who's a real industry veteran. So it's just going to be fascinating over the next couple of years to see what he manages to achieve with that. What do you shoot with, Leon? Are you
I'm a Browning man.
Oh, really? You're a Browning?
Yeah. I'm actually a small bore man. I say small bore. I've been saying it for a few years. I shoot with a 20 Browning, and I have done now for 9 years, and I just find it absolutely brilliant. Like, it's so much fun.
I was actually having an argument the other day with Tom Payne about 20 balls. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for them. There's a lot to be said for something that's light, that you can wander around with, put a lot of cartridges in your pocket. But he disagreed. And he does know a hell of a lot more than I do, actually, about shooting, but right.
Don't let him know that. Don't let him know that.
There was a very interesting column in this week's issue by Louisa Clutterbuck. Louisa writes a column for us each month on promoting games. So the British Game Assurance. Do you want us to just give us a sentence or two on the British Game Assurance, Leon, and what the
I will. I was going to go into a bit more detail. So there's quite a few changes happening at the VGA, and changes for the good, and really I'm super excited for. But yeah, we're a assurance scheme, which is to enable us to have more traceability on our game birds, which is ideal. And you'll know this from loads of conversations we've had before, Patrick, about a traceability and an assurance. The days of knocking at the back door of the local pub are gone. Unfortunately for that local pub, it's no fault of the pubs or anyone's like that. It's environmental health organisation, your EHO officers and your food hygiene are really coming down on kitchens and their basically forms of traceability and quality within that kitchen, and that's why there needs to be an assurance chain, because that you have full traceability, and then any problems go back to all. There's a full line of that assurance, which is so key right now, especially in today's times.
One of the things that Louisa talks about this week, and that you guys are actually really strong on, I often see on Instagram and so on, that you've been kind of all over the country, and that you're then kind of reporting back on that. And the content's really strong that you put out on social media. But she was saying, social media is really key in terms of what you guys are trying to do.
Oh, I really do agree strongly with that. And the reason for that is again, I was listening to something recently as another podcast, I won't say who, and they were talking about the younger generation, and that's where what we need to do, foolproof the future, right? So we're foolproofing the future, and that is the younger generation understanding what wild meat game is, and wanting to use it and eat it more regularly. And that's the key. Social media is so big. I mean, we're talking about one video can go viral in the space of a few hours, not days anymore. It's a few hours, and we can get millions of likes on videos. I mean, and some of the stuff on there is absolute dross, but some of the stuff is really informative, and it does capture the nation or the country, the world, and really focus and pinpoint issues potentially, and also bring positivity out. So, do you know what? Social media is a massive tool.
Just unpacking that a bit. I mean, social media is very important, but I mean, social media is important in terms of what? Is it important in terms of changing the culture that we have around eating, right? Is that where we go wrong in terms of
trying to capture and engage those people who not necessarily would look up and have a conversation with someone who was within our industry, that you could talk about using wild meat game, whatever they do, working dogs, whatever it is. So yeah, that's why I feel it is important.
What we need to do really to get more people eating game is to sort of try and change the food culture that we have in this country to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've been quoted several times, gone are the days of whole roasted birds, right? I mean, we've got to look at innovative ideas. And I say that everyone has done everything. We know that sausages work. We know that burgers work. We've had them. We've tried them. Pies are hugely popular throughout our industry and beyond. But things like getting these really hip high street chains involved.
So how easy is it to do that? Are they receptive to?
Do you know what? It's one of the hardest things. I've been doing it for 5 years, and it's extremely hard. But we are making headspace. A lot of way in the last few months, especially. I mean, I've just been talking to Louisa this afternoon. I've got so much exciting news that we can't publish yet, but it does show where the levy is going and what we're doing, and the new incentive that's to come out, which is our Back British Game incentive. And everyone will be involved in this one. So this is quite a new thing, Patrick, which is Back British Game, which is an incentive that we're launching, which will be funding the promotion of wild meat. And that's what we need from our community to back that campaign. And from that, I will be able to then go to these places like the high streets and start getting them on. We've got some really good stuff coming up. I just can't talk about it right now, but it's really exciting.
There's a point that Louisa made, which is a really interesting one. She says, last week we shared a video of breasting a partridge and then turning it into a sandwich similar to the one seen in Pret. The response was fantastic, right? The obvious question that leads to is, how do we actually get partridge sandwiches into Pret? I mean, what sort of process is that like?
The process is so intense. So one, they will have Pret will probably have a deal with their local food supplier, of which they buy the majority of their, let's say, meat, but it might be a job lot. It might be a Breaks or a Bid Food or a Reynolds of the world. These companies I'm just talking about are really large food suppliers within the UK. They're huge. I mean, Reynolds is a £250 million business, and Breaks and Bid Food are far beyond that. And they would have a deal with them, and it would be almost down to Pret having a development team and looking at the possibilities of will it fit and a remit. And unfortunately, sometimes it's about opinion and those people who work within that business's opinion. But once you start telling the sustainable story, once you start talking about backing the British countryside, or back British farming, back British game, people start getting involved. Sustainability, now people start listening. So one of the key factors, I'm talking to the UK's biggest, let's just say, caterer in the UK. They approached us wanting to talk about the sustainability side of it. They're seeing a huge food culture shift of people looking for sustainable food. So, we've seen a huge drop in vegan food now in retail. It's 30% in the last few months. So that's a huge drop in people.
Wow.
Yeah, that's documented.
30%. I mean, what, like a 30% decline in people buying vegan options?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're talking about 30%. People start going, oh, that's loads. But, vegan actually only makes up, I think, and I want to say around about 2.5 to 3% of food sales in the UK. So 30% of that has dropped, of that 2.5% or 3%. So
why do you think that is? I mean, is veganism going out of fashion?
Do you know what? Everyone said veganism is the way forward, right? And everyone jumped on this bandwagon, and then, people started going, well, I can't really get much vegan food. and then we came up with the last 3 years we've had this big explosion on vegan bacon, vegan burgers, vegan things that look like meat but taste like meat but not are meat. I mean, that's not right, okay? In my opinion, it doesn't taste nice at all. I had some 3D printed steak a few months ago. Bloody awful. So let's can that one. Let's can that one and stick a pin in it. I think it's because people are finding contradictory terms across the internet when people start spouting about vegan and soya and avocados, and then you've got the fantastic Jeremy Clarkson saying, "Well, I can run a Peugeot 306 for a year, and by the time that avocado has been brought over to the country," it was something along those lines, wasn't it? In Clarkson's farm.
There was a piece I really enjoyed in this week's issue by Simon Garnham in the Jottings for Wildfowlers column. And he talks about whether wildfowling is slightly kind of going out of fashion, or, I mean, one thing that I always find is when we put wildfowling on the front of the magazine, people really go for it. Like the sales figures go right up. But I don't think that everybody buying the magazine that week is a wildfowler, right? But it appeals to them in some way. So, I think the thing that's happening there is that it's this like image, it's this sense, it's this culture they go for. Do you think with food we're sort of getting to that point as well, where this notion of the wild and kind of connecting with wild places, is that like inspiring people's food choices in a way that it hasn't before?
I'm going to say I've been very lucky enough to go out with Simon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I did a piece for you guys a couple of months ago now. I think I got up at like 1 o'clock in the morning. I was at Simon's by 4 a.m. and we were out on out wildfowling, and I can honestly say it was probably one of my best days shooting in the last 10-15 years. We didn't get much, but we just had a fantastic morning. I was more in awe of the scenery and
Yeah.
the tranquility of how quiet and calm it was before everything come in. So
Did you cook what you?
yeah, we did. We had breakfast that morning because it was so early. We were starving by the time we got back. So we got a couple of widgeon, teal, and mallard, and I did a breakfast. My take on breakfast. So you got your classic steak and eggs. I mean, go away with that. I'm not really into that anymore. But we had teal, widgeon, and mallard with eggs. Some beautiful confit potatoes and some spinach. And then I did a bit of piri piri over the top of the eggs as well, just to give it a little bit of a kick first thing in the morning. So yeah, it was absolutely phenomenal.
And obviously, I mean, what you're shooting there is completely wild.
And then you saying that it's a dying art. I mean, it's easy to say that maybe because he's not seeing as many people out. I mean, whilst we were out on the bank, he talked about wildfowling clubs and the amount of people in those wildfowling clubs and everything on the banks that when we were talking. And I'm guessing maybe he's seeing a decline in that, which would make you think. But isn't that to do with age, Patrick? You know, isn't that like the age of the wildfowler is a bit older than your
Might be that. I mean, the question that I wanted to ask is that, you know, when you're I mean, that stuff you were eating was completely wild. Do you think the notion of eating completely wild food appeals to the public? I mean, when people are buying meat, will they buy venison because it's completely wild and because there's a sort of
yeah, absolutely. Why not roll back to the 50s, 60s where people had their own veg gardens and grew their own vegetables. The meat was hand reared locally within a 5-mile radius. Milk was delivered from the local dairy. There were bakers making fresh bread. You know, all of it is just proper food. And you know what? You know, I talk about it. The generation, a couple of generations before me are still wanting that, and they're telling our generation that's what they need. So then we start to revert to all the trends, and those trends being, well, it's wild, it's sustainable, it's within our environment. Why aren't we eating off the pastures? And I think that's the kind of idea of it, maybe.
That's really interesting. So you think, like, you know, the general shopping public, the meat buying public, do get that and are into
I go to a fantastic butcher nearby, and I see the same faces every week who swear by good quality meat. And I mean, I'm very lucky when I'm not eating game that I do get really good hand reared quality meat. And I think that's what everyone's really looking for, right? But of ease and convenience, we dart into Waitrose and Sainsbury's and Marks and Spencer's, Morrison's, because there's one on every corner. And what again, we would probably sell more wild meat game if we probably had more of the butchers and the bakers of the world making pies and that locally than we've ever done personally, you know, when you've got that access to it, because it's hard to find, right?
In field sports, you are probably a bit of a, there's a perception that field sports is totally white, right?
Yeah.
And you are, I mean, you're a black guy from Birmingham.
Well, I wouldn't say Birmingham, but yeah, my roots as such. My father is a Caribbean, West Indian Caribbean, so he's Jamaican, and he's from the Midlands, and my grandparents are Windrush generation,
Right.
So yes.
And do you feel? I mean, I think it's sometimes almost a stick that's actually used to sort of beat field sports with, that it's this kind of cabal of crusty old white guys. I mean, look, tell me.
That's still true. It is. No, I mean, no. It's crusty old white guys. Look, it's a hugely inclusive industry. Okay, because I'm in it, and I've not had a single problem. And do we add women to this as well? And we say, yeah, they're inclusive as well. There's so many more women out shooting than ever before. So it's a hugely inclusive industry. Where do we fail? I tell you where we fail, from my opinion. There are some phenomenal people within our industry. Aaron Kennedy, the Rainbow Farmer. You got Al Gabriel, working for Basque. the Kenyan pig farmer. There's some really cool people out there doing some stuff who I would consider black. Is that the right thing to say? Mixed heritage, I would say. And it's hugely inclusive. But we're failing on adding to those ranks.
I mean, I was with a young mixed race guy the other day who was just talking to me about how he feels in the countryside, and when he goes out into the countryside, he was saying he doesn't always feel totally welcome. He feels as though sometimes people look at him and think, "Oh, what on earth is?"
I can't tell you of the stories. I cannot air the stories I've had of my experiences. I lived in Somerset, rural Somerset, for 10 years of my catering career, on and off. So I dipped in for 2-3 years and dipped out for a year and then dipped back in, working in some phenomenal establishments down there. And, my first experiences, they weren't welcoming at all. And there is this kind of, they are quite remote, cut off, and they do kind of, look at you going, is he going to speak English to me? Is it going to be a foreign language? We're not quite sure. And it sounds very desperate, but it is actually true. I mean, listen, I've experienced it.
Do you think, though, that the shooting community, sort of separate from that, if you can separate the two out, is a warm and inclusive and welcoming community? That's
they absolutely are. They really. I mean, you've got to look at the game fair and the amount of people that I know at that industry event. I get pulled from pillar to post to have a beer with this person, that person, and catch up. How have I been? What's going on? Absolutely. There's no doubt we're an inclusive industry. No doubt in my mind we're an inclusive industry. I think that we need to encourage more people of an ethnic background to be a part of the industry. And we'll be surprised by how many people out there that want to get involved, that don't because they're worried, but probably drink in your local pub. So any of the listeners out there that have that guy that drinks in the local, girl that drinks in the local pub, that is wants to have that conversation, but you haven't yet include him, because you never know, it could surprise you.
I'll tell you this. This to me was so heartwarming. I was sitting in the office one Friday afternoon, and I got a phone call from a farmer down in the West Country, and he said, "Is this Shooting Times?" I said, "Yes, this is Shooting Times." He said, "You're sending a boy down to write an article on us this weekend." I said, "Yes, here we are." And he said, "I just want to say, there's a chap down here, and he likes to wear a dress on shoot days, but I don't want your writer to make him feel any different." I looked across the office and I said, "Right, well, I'll pass the message on." So I put the phone on mute. I said, "Listen, there's a bloke on this shoot. He likes to wear a dress, and you're not to make him feel any different." And this young staff writer looked up at me. He said, "Not a problem. Right, you are." And the following Monday, he came in and I said, "How was it?" And he said, "Well, it was exactly as you said it was going to be." So there was this guy there in a dress with nail varnish and whatever, and apparently it was a very good shot. But it's just a funny, it's a funny thing. I think sometimes the countryside and shooting can be a lot more welcoming than people perhaps like to think. It's a really
I think there is. You're right. There's a perception, right? Crusty old men, did we say at the beginning of this? So there is a perception, and I think we should start breaking down those barriers now. It's 2023. It's a hugely inclusive industry. I feel welcomed everywhere I go. I've not had a single issue, problem, comment, or anything like that in my entire time that I've been in the industry, and even more so now than ever before. So, and we include everyone, like you just said, even the guy that likes to shoot in a dress. Do you know what? I'd have a go myself, actually, Patrick. It might be a good experience.
Yeah, sort of good for swinging through those long birds. I just wanted to ask a question that I'm sure you've been asked like 1,000 times, but it's quite warm at the moment still. The pheasant season started already. How long should you hang birds?
No. Look, I love this question, and I cannot stress enough. I had a guy, I was on stage a couple of years ago now at the game fair, and someone asked this very question. I said, "You shouldn't hang birds." And then someone piped up with going, "Well, I think you should, and you should hang them for at least 10 days. And I say, right, that's preference. Absolutely. It's everyone has a different taste. If you want to really include people in eating, getting wild meat, game, whatever, if you want them to eat more, we need to be sensible about the situation. So we don't hang turkeys. We don't hang chicken. Okay, so let's stop hanging pheasant. Fresh birds are fantastic. Fresh pheasant is fantastic. It is a lighter flavour. We all know that, and that works for the people who are new to eating game. And a classic example of that is shooting with Simon Garnham a few months ago, and his daughter was going out to the cinema. A friend came over. I'd cooked breakfast. It was 10 a.m. in the morning. They were all pumped to go out and watch, I don't know, the latest movie. And I said, "Would you like to stay for breakfast?" She said, "Well, what are we having?" I went, "Just take a plate, sit down and try." And she did. And she ate it and she said, "This is amazing," because she could visually relate to what was on the plate. And then she ate it and said, "Well, it's absolutely fantastic." And there was no gaminess. It was a really well balanced, lovely, fresh flavour of meat, just a good quality flavour. And that's because we didn't hang the birds; we ate them fresh there and then. And I think that's what a lot of people. If you want to start changing your I don't know, your mums, dads, aunties, uncles, anyone who else in the family, we all have them in the industry. People who we live with or not live with, who we know that we eat game all the time and they don't. Try them on fresh birds, because it's a world apart. It really is. So no to your answer, Patrick. Don't hang game. Eat it as fresh as you can. Come on, I don't want to see chickens outside of the local butcher in the next few weeks. So
my final question I just wanted to ask was, I always remember being about 14, 15 years old maybe, and talking to a friend's father about game. And he said to me that for decades, they'd said to the gamekeeper that you keep the game as like a perk of the job, and you sell it to the game dealer, and you can, And he said at the beginning, this was like really generous. The gamekeeper was really doing quite well out of this. And he said, about 2012, 2013, the gamekeeper turned around to him and said, "Look, this is still really kind, but they're actually charging me now to take the game away." Where did we go wrong, or what changed?
It's quite a hard one. There's so many factors involved. I would blame convenience food shopping personally. My personal opinion is, certainly when I was at that age, my granddad, my mother, my nan, they all shop at butchers and veg shops and bakeries and go down to local dairy. We're now walking into Tesco's and Waitrose and Sainsbury's and buying convenience food really, really quickly. So that lessened the amount of game that we're selling, I guess, because let's be honest, we've all seen the pictures of the butchers full of pheasants and rabbits and partridges all hanging outside, and we used to eat so much of it back in the day. And everyone, you can talk to anyone of the older generation, say, "Oh, we always used to have partridge, we always used to have pheasant," and that's because it was so accessible back then.
So my question to you would be, you're doing a great job at the British Game Assurance, but are you actually, as the proverb goes, pissing in the wind? Because there's just far too much game being put down and far too much game being shot. I mean, is it a sort of supply and demand?
There's not. I mean, we touched base on it. Sorry, we touched base on it before we started this. I'm going to throw out. Everyone loves a figure. Here's some figures for you. Apparently, and we don't know because it's down to the game dealers to really, do their own census and tell everyone what they are. But they are processing 20 million game birds a season. I reckon we put down about 50 million game birds a season.
50.
Yeah, 50, yeah. So with the 33% rule, we lose to, the 33% that we shoot, and we lose to different things. We're eating, or we process 20 million game birds. To put that in perspective, we slaughter 1.1 billion chickens in the UK a year. So we're eating 23 million chickens a week in the UK. This is just UK facts. So let's be realistic. No, we're not pissing in the wind. We need the British public to step up and back British game. And that's basically it. And we wouldn't have a problem. In fact, I would say if we really if the industry got behind not just the BGA, but every campaign, everyone that's eating and trying to support and sell more wild meat and game in the industry, we would probably get to a point where you would find a new enterprise of people opening up trying to rear pheasants and farm pheasants, because we would, because it's such a great meat. that we would want more of them here in the UK. So no, I think we're not. I think that we're going to keep going, and success is so close. Oh, and
Really,
it takes, just to tip the balance, it only takes a couple of really big conglomerate businesses here in the UK within catering to change the dial. We talked about it a little while now. We've got the MOD. That's a deal that I put together and orchestrated myself many years ago when the VGA first started, and they do a volume on head to game going into the business, and I've got. Again, I can't talk about it because we haven't got the right communication signed off yet. But I've got other things lined up now, which are so exciting that we're going to be able to see on, I would call, the day-to-day sort of television type things that the people will see with more people eating game. So yeah.
I just wanted to end with, lately I've been talking to lots of people across the country about various different issues to do with land access, and there's an idea that you get two sorts of people: those who like shooting and those who just don't like the idea of killing animals at all. And I have to say, I actually really disagree with that. What I hear time and time again from people who are critical of field sports across the country is the line: they don't even take the birds with them. They just shoot them for fun. And I mean, we all know that's not true, right? But we also all know that there isn't a huge market sometimes for what it is we're shooting, or that market hasn't been realised. And I think, Leon, you are on the front line of proving those people wrong. You're on the front line of us getting to a situation where we can turn around and say, actually, you know what, that isn't the case. So I think that's really, really important. The time is really here to ensure that as many people are eating game as possible, and to ensure that the market is as big as possible for game.
I couldn't agree more. No, it really is.
Thanks, Leon, for coming on. This time tomorrow, the episode comes out and the latest copy of Shooting Times hits the shelves. Thank you very much to all the listeners. It's been a pleasure.